Jack Callahan had never thought the road home would feel so long, nor that the dust of New Mexico would sting so sharp against his face as the sun dragged itself low across the horizon, and yet as he urged his tired mare, Daisy, down the winding trail that led back to what once had been his father's ranch, every clop of her hooves seemed to echo with the ghosts of a past he could never quite leave behind. 7 years had slipped through his fingers like water since the last time he had ridden this way, 7 years of drifting from town to town with nothing but his revolver and the weight of a name that meant less with every border crossed, 7 years of poor wages earned at the barrel of a gun and of nights spent staring at stars that gave no answers, and all of every card game lost, every fight picked, every bullet dodged that had led him back here, a man with no fortune, no family, and no certainty except that the land he returned to was the only place in the world that had ever felt like it might forgive him, if only he could find the strength to forgive himself. But as the battered gate of the Callahan spread came into sight, leaning crooked on its rusted hinges, he felt the pit of his stomach drop, for something unnatural, something monstrous, swayed against the backdrop of the evening sky, a dark silhouette dangling in mockery of the life that once had been nurtured on this soil, and though his first thought was that it might be some scarecrow nailed up by squatters who now claimed his land, his second glance shattered that fragile hope, because it was not a bundle of rags or hay but the body of a girl, the girl who seemed too large for the world, her head brushing the top beam of the gate, her limbs long and strange, her presence so unnatural in death that for a moment Jack thought he must be dreaming, that the desert heat had poisoned his eyes, until Daisy shied beneath him, snorting in fear as though the animal knew better than her rider what cruelty had taken place here, and Jack yanked back on the reins, his heart slamming against his ribs as he swung down from the saddle, boots crunching in the dust. His breath caught somewhere between fury and disbelief. Never had he seen a woman of such size, her body proportioned like that of a giantess, her long dark hair tangled in the wind, her wrists bound before her in rough rope, her bare feet dangling inches from the ground as though the killers had meant for every passer-by to see and shudder, a warning nailed into flesh and bone that here, in this land, power belonged to those ruthless enough to wield it. And yet for all the violence written across her skin, the bruises, the cuts, the cruel knot around her neck, her face was strangely serene, her eyes closed as if she were merely asleep, as if the desert itself had claimed her and wrapped her in its eternal silence. Jack staggered closer, his throat dry, muttering half a prayer and half a curse, for though he had seen men die in saloon shootouts and in border raids, though he had seen comrades fall with their lifeblood soaking into the dust, this was different. This was a cruelty that served no purpose but hate, and as he reached up with trembling fingers to cut the rope with the worn hunting knife on his belt, the weight of her body fell against him like a collapsed wall, knocking him to his knees in the dirt, and for a moment he thought he might buckle beneath her sheer size, but his arms held, and he eased her down into the tall grass, laying her carefully as though she might break, brushing her hair away from her face with a gentleness he hadn't felt in years, whispering through clenched teeth, "Who are you, girl? Who could have done this to you?" Yet the desert wind gave no answer save the rustle of mesquite and the faint echo of laughter carried from somewhere beyond the western canyon rim, laughter sharp and mocking, the kind of laughter that told him whoever had done this was not gone, not far, perhaps even waiting for him to arrive and bear witness to the desecration of his family's gate. His jaw tightened, rage burning beneath the weariness in his bones, for he knew what it meant. This was not just murder, it was a message, a declaration that the Callahan name was worth less than the dirt it was written in, that trespassers had claimed the land, and they would paint its boundaries with blood to keep it theirs. But Jack Callahan had not come all this way to bow his head and ride on. He had returned with nothing left to lose, and that made him a dangerous man indeed. Still, before the reckoning that would surely come, he bent his head in respect over the girl's lifeless form, tipping his hat and whispering with the low solemnity of a vow, "I don't know who you were, darlin', but you ain't gonna be left to the buzzards, not while I draw breath." And as he said it he felt the stir of something old and half forgotten in his chest, a sense of duty, of belonging, of the kind of justice that his father once had spoken of when he said a rancher's job wasn't just to tend cattle but to tend the land and the people who needed shelter upon it. And Jack rose, his hands still trembling but his heart steady, turned his eyes toward the canyon where the laughter still echoed, and rested his hand on the worn grip of his revolver, for though he had been a poor rancher's son and a drifter with nothing to his name, tonight he was something more. He was the reckoning that this land, and whoever had dared desecrate it, had called down upon themselves.